Welcome to a brand new episode of the Front End Happy Hour podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Burgess. Today, we're diving into a conversation with someone who's been doing incredible work for over a decade now. Catlin first joined us back in May of 2021. And today, she's back on to reflect on the last 10 years on her journey with better allies and helping people in the workplace. Karen is a former tech leader turned leadership coach. She's the author of Better Allies, a book series that is focused on improving inclusion in the workplace. In this episode, Karen shares her journey on how a simple bingo card back in 2014 has now sparked an entire movement around allyship.
Literally, it started with a bingo card.
Karen's work is focused on everyday actions that are small but impactful.
I learned I really needed to understand and support and be a better ally myself for people from other underrepresented groups.
Actions that each of us can take to make a workplace more inclusive. In the episode, we got into some interesting discussions on how language has changed over the years and how subtle shifts in the way we use language can really make a more meaningful impact to an inclusive environment. In a world full of cancel culture and calling people out, Karen shares her approach to calling people in rather than calling them out.
So the strategy is seek common ground and educate.
This conversation is packed full of practical advice on how we can be better allies both in and outside of the workplace. Without further ado, let's dive into the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Karen, you've been a leadership coach, leader at tech companies, the author of Better Allies, which is honestly such an amazing book, one of my favorites. And it's celebrating its 10th year now?
That's right, Ryan. It is so fun to be back here on the Front End Happy Hour podcast. And yeah, the book is not 10 years old yet, but my work on Better Allies is 10 years old. I'm celebrating my 10th anniversary of focusing on this important work of allyship, how people can be better allies to anyone who's underrepresented in their workplace. And as you know, my whole approach is what are some of the everyday actions people can take to be more inclusive so that really everyone can do their best work and thrive. So that work started 10 years ago.
That's awesome. I mean, I've benefited a lot from it because the book as well as your newsletters have just helped me small things, just little things that you read it and you're especially in the newsletter, you're like, huh, I really like that. It's just something that I can apply that to my team or how I think about something. I think to me, it's always just changing your way of thinking just a little bit can go such a long way. I was even lucky enough to be featured in one of your newsletters, and I don't think you even knew at the time, but it had been someone on my team had tweeted that something that I had done for them, and they were celebrating it, and you had pulled that out, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool to be featured in it too. So I love how that circle happens.
Yeah, I used to love Twitter. Don't spend as much time on that anymore, but that was such a good source for me to understand what was happening in many workplaces, examples of great allyship, as you got called out on. And then also all the cautionary tales I got to kind of mine and talk about and learn from too. Yeah. Getting more of that from other social media platforms these days, I must admit. Twitter, X, whatever, it doesn't feel the same.
It doesn't feel the same, Karen. It's sad because like you, and probably when you and I first started conversing was through Twitter too. Yeah. And in those times, it was I've met so many amazing people, had so many great conversations, learned so many things too, just like you had mentioned, but it doesn't feel the same. I still go there a little bit, but just not as much. I'm curious, what's the platform of choice for you now that's kind of you're finding that you go to more?
LinkedIn. LinkedIn is where I feel I get incredible engagement. I learn a lot and so forth. And I'm also doing a lot more on Instagram. So I, the accounts I follow on Instagram it's a different vibe than LinkedIn, but it's different. Yeah. Definitely still, I can search for different things. That said, I am trying to help curate content from Threads. Threads seems like it's got so much potential. It's not quite there for me yet, but I'm spending more and more time there daily. I am on Threads looking for information I can learn from, as well as sharing things that I am learning. So I'm hopeful about Threads.
That's awesome. I've go there a little bit here and there. Maybe I need to spend a little bit more time. Now I can follow you for some good content, so that might be it too. Is I feel like it's not quite there too, but I feel the same. It has that potential. It has sucked me in here and there. So
Yeah.
you start to find that in your own trends. You're like, oh yeah, there's something here. So that's good to hear. I like that. Let's dive into 10 years of your work, which thankfully we have all benefited from, like I'd mentioned earlier. How did that start? How did that
Yeah.
journey start? I know when you joined us, it was a couple years ago. I think it was in May 2021 that you joined us on an episode talking about inclusion and the work that you're doing, which honestly, if you haven't listened to that episode, please go back and listen. It is so good. It's jam-packed full of information that is very, very useful. But let's get to how did you start this work? And I know you had left a high tech position, and this is something that brought you into that journey.
Yeah, yeah. So literally, it started with a bingo card. A bingo card I saw online that had been created for the Grace Hopper celebration in 2014. Grace Hopper, for people who don't know, is like the biggest celebration of women and non-binary people in tech. And it's an amazing annual conference that they hold. And in 2014, one of the featured sessions was the Male Allies panel. And ahead of time, there were some people who were kind of upset, concerned about this Male Allies panel because it was a group of men taking away key speaking slots at a women's conference and non-binary people conference from the people who should be on stage. So there was some concern, like, why do they get to speak and we don't? But also there was some concern about, like, if these people in their companies were so great at male allyship, why aren't there more women in their tech companies? Because the numbers don't look good that are being reported. So a lot of concern was building. So ahead of time, a group of people made a bingo card of all the phrases they thought these men who thought they were better allies would be saying on stage. And they handed the bingo card out as people walked into that auditorium. And sure enough, about halfway through, some woman yelled out bingo because she had gotten the bingo. She had heard enough phrases on her card. And of course, there was laughter in the audience. I wasn't there. I heard all of this secondhand. But that bingo card and that experience led me to realize, wait, these actually are good guys. They were willing to go to this conference, take time out of their schedule, speak about this topic. They're probably doing a lot of work. They're good guys, but they don't get it. So what if I created an alternative bingo card of all the phrases we do want to hear from men working in tech or working in any industry, frankly, to show that they are being allies and these are the things we want them to be doing. So I worked with another engineering woman in engineering. Her name's Kate Houston, and she and I created an alternative bingo card of all the phrases we did want to hear. We then decided we needed to share that bingo card. We wrote a story for it for the Daily Beast, as well as I started a Twitter handle called Better Allies. And that Twitter handle initially was anonymous. I wanted to pretend, I guess, that I was a man tweeting about how to be a better ally. I just thought my voice would be so much stronger if a man was telling other men how to do this. So it was anonymous. And that Twitter handle just started growing in popularity. That led me, people actually asked me to speak and they didn't even know who I was. Anyone at that Better Allies Twitter handle, can they come and give a talk on this topic? It's really important. So I started getting speaking requests, which I always accepted because I love talking and I love speaking about this important topic. And then people started asking me to write a book. So that did lead me to writing my first book, which is called Better Allies. And then I since have written 3 more books as well in the Better Allies series. So, and as you say, I write this weekly newsletter. I can't not do it now. It's just part of who I am, what I'm doing professionally. And based on the feedback I get, I just know this is filling a need. So it fuels me. It fuels me to keep going.
I love that too. It's like, because sometimes, you get in that rhythm of things and people are like, how do you do that? Right. Like, because it's work, right? It is work. But after you've been doing it for so long, sometimes it just becomes like a bit of a habit that you've just worked into your way of doing things. But also I'm guessing that it's also a drive when people tell you these things like, hey, I've gotten
Yeah.
value out of this, and that is probably a huge motivator, I'm assuming.
I know this about myself. Many people are like this. I thrive on positive reinforcement. That's the thing that does make me keep going. So I know I have some people who disagree with me, some haters out there. This 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 stuff ain't my responsibility to fix, or I don't care about this. I had to work hard to get where I am. Why can't everyone else figure it out? Whatever the pushback might be. Um, this wokeness stuff is not for me. I have some haters, but I have so many supporters, and that positive feedback, that positive reinforcement is the thing that keeps me going.
I love hearing that. That's so good. And unfortunately, well, maybe it's actually I don't know, you could look at it a positive of like there's always going to be haters. And I think when
Yeah.
you're doing something of value, you're always going to have the haters. Like it doesn't matter. It's
Yeah.
like, and as you grow, you're going to have more of that, but hopefully that you have more of the supporters that outweigh that. But you're still going to have more of the trolls and the haters that are out there. And it's tough. Like it's not an easy thing to just ignore. It's there.
Yeah, it helps me get through it. It's almost like any startup, whether it's a startup product within a larger company or a startup itself, a startup company. If you've got competition, if you've got someone else trying to solve the same problem, it's validating. And to me, it's almost like when you've got haters out there working on, and you're on a potentially controversial topic, it actually validates that you're doing good work. So
I
anyway,
like
sort of a
that too.
connection there.
No, that's good. That's always helpful for people to hear that too, because I think like when you put yourself out there, like, and I love that you kind of started like as this like alter ego that was a man and kind of behind the scenes. I think that was a way that was probably just easier for you to get those opinions out there. And then you start to realize, okay, like this, all right, cool. I can put my face on this now. But, anytime you're putting your face out there, it's hard. Like it is a
Yeah.
tough thing because people are going to hate on it and say something. And so that is tough. But I love hearing your perspective on that.
As I was writing the book, and as soon as I was getting close to publishing it, I'm like, I'm putting my name on this. Writing a book is a lot of work. I want to get all
Yes.
the credit.
You
So
should
that's
like,
when I kind of outed myself as the voice behind this whole thing.
I mean, yeah, like I have friends that have written books and like just hearing the sheer volume of work that goes into it, it's like, yeah, you need to put your name on that. Like, it's like, even if it's a flop, you're like, I did that. I don't care. Like I put in that work.
Thank you. Yeah.
Cool. Well, so yeah, you've had 10 years of this, like 10 years strong. 10 years of anything is a really long time. So, you've written, like you mentioned, a series of books now. You've had the newsletter, you've done things on Twitter and now on other social media platforms. You know, I'd be really curious as how has that message evolved? Like it started from this bingo card, which I remember hearing all this back when you had mentioned that. I'm like, oh yes, I totally remember this happening. But yeah, so bingo card kicks it off. Like what has changed through your thoughts on this and just as you reflect on those 10 years?
Yeah. Yeah. So I first started doing this work because I was a woman in tech and underrepresented as a result. One thing I started learning through my work on the bingo card, even though it was very heavily gender oriented then, I learned I really needed to understand and support and be a better ally myself for people from other underrepresented groups that I'm not a part of, given all the privilege I have. I'm a white woman. I have, the incredible career behind me that gives me a lot of privilege to navigate certain conversations and rooms, frankly. There's but I am not a person of color. I am not someone who does not have a college degree from a highly selective university. I am not someone who is a member of the LGBTQ plus community. I am not someone who's living with a disability. I needed to learn about so many other experiences and make sure that I could identify how we could be better allies for everyone who's underrepresented. To the best of my abilities. And so I quickly learned I needed to expand beyond just gender. And especially so many people, myself included, when we first start focusing on gender, it's usually the white woman's experience working in tech or any other industry. And I absolutely had to expand my understanding and knowledge of what it's like to be a woman of color in these industries. So that was a huge learning. And frankly, Ryan, if I had realized how much I had to learn 10 years ago, I probably wouldn't have done any of this. It would have been overwhelming to realize how much I didn't know. So that naivete sometimes is a benefit. And so
Yeah.
that yeah, right. I mean, so with
Yeah.
that naivete, I had the confidence to get started. And once that's the whole thing started, I had the confidence to keep pushing forward. And I'm still learning today, which is why, this is so interesting to me too, this whole field.
I think that's what I've always gravitated towards too, is like, so let's talk about privilege there too, is like I'm even higher on the chain of privilege at that point, being, a white man. And I like that you like kind of unpack it that way too, is that there's a lot of privilege that comes along with that, and recognizing that. And I think that that to me is always a really good start to that journey, to kind of open your mind to say like, yeah, okay, I have this, but what are other things that I'm unaware of, like you said, of someone with color or someone who's an immigrant, all these types of things that
Mhm.
have different shapes that come to, maybe the tech industry, hopefully, because it has gotten better over the years. Maybe even some of your work has absolutely helped that. It is tough too, because you're right, like you start to go down that journey and it's a constant learning thing. It's like you're never done. I feel like I learned so much from you, and even hearing you say that is like, oh, I'm still learning all the time. I kind of like that too. It's like there's no perfect answer for it. It's like something that we're just constantly evolving and getting better at. And I think that's a cool thing to be diving into.
Absolutely. And I'm so thankful for any individual who shares their story online in whatever format so that I can learn from that. I'm so thankful for the conversations I get to have with clients where things come up and I learn from that. I am so thankful for researchers who spend time looking into um, non-inclusive situations, whether it's based on the feedback you might be giving to employees or the hiring practices or whatever it might be. I'm so thankful to those researchers who do that research and then share their results in public papers. So I just want to give shout outs to all of
Yeah.
those people who I get to learn from. And it's a pleasure. It's an honor actually to be able to distill some of the things I learn through my newsletter.
That's amazing. And I guess maybe on that note of like learning, and like you said, I started off almost naive to like how much I needed to learn. What are some of the things, looking back on this 10-year journey, of like things that really just hit you hard, like, oh my god, I learned that? Like, what were some of the things that really just helped you learn it? Like, obviously papers and reading and other books and life experience in general, but I'm curious, what are some of the things that really just stuck out for you as like, wow, that was a learning moment?
It's so interesting. So a few years ago, I started an annual edition of my newsletter called Pundit Accountability. And I learned this from a New York Times reporter who does a daily newsletter, just like, those of us who are journalists should have a pundit accountability, like things we got wrong about our journalism. And I'm like, I should do that too, because I get things wrong. And I talk about it in my newsletter when it happens, but I think it's good to have
Yep.
kind of an annual edition. So a big thing for me, and this is going to be ongoing, but it's language. It's my language that I use that I don't realize is non-inclusive. Now, early on, I started realizing a lot of people don't like the word guys. Hey guys, y'all,
Yep.
you guys, whatever. That was part of my vernacular, but a lot of women and non-binary people just feel like this is not including me at all. So that's like an easy example. But I've also learned to say things like, oh, in my book, Better Allies, I wrote something about because these women didn't want to handicap their careers, they did blah, blah, blah. Handicap their careers. Well, someone gave me feedback that that is an ableist term, assuming that a handicap is a bad thing, to handicap something. I kind of was thinking it was more like golf, but maybe golf, the usage of golf, and you have a handicap is also an ableist term. Anyway, so I could have just said the word hurt. These women didn't want to hurt their careers or damage their careers or something like that. I've used the phrase nursing mother's room, which is really, it's an outdated term that I'm used to. Like, workplaces should have a nursing mother's room, when really a lactation room is better because it's just more inclusive for non-binary or people who are transitioning who happen to be feeding a child through lactation. Oh my gosh, here's another one. I'll just do one more about language. I must admit I did not know about Juneteenth 10 years ago. This
I
is
think a
something
lot of us didn't. Yeah, that one's
yeah.
a yeah.
Wow. And maybe if I grew up in the South, which I did not, maybe if I had, I would have learned about, I don't even know. But Juneteenth is an annual celebration for people who don't know about when the last group of enslaved people in Texas learned about the Civil War being won in their favor and the Emancipation Proclamation. And it was like 2 years after the war had ended, I think, officially. So it was like it was a long time, and so people celebrate this anniversary for the significance that it is. When I wrote about it in my newsletter for the first time, I described people as slaves. I said something like, when the slaves in Texas, in this one town in Texas, finally heard about the Emancipation Proclamation, and people said, Karen, don't use the word slaves. It describes someone as that is their only identity. It's more inclusive to call them formerly enslaved people. So, like, just language. I'm just
Yeah.
making mistakes about language all the time. That when you're a part of the demographic, the identity that is not inclusive of it feels like this person doesn't know what they're talking about. They're not thinking of me. They don't get it. And it turns people away from important conversations, from work conversations, whatever. So I do really try to learn and be evolving my language. Okay. I mean, I've got a list of some of these pundit accountability things in front of me. Want one more?
Absolutely. Keep going.
Okay.
This is great. These are lessons that we all are learning. I actually want to stop too and say, like, thank you for your vulnerability too. Like, I think looking back at those mistakes, it's really easy to just like almost feel shame for doing them. I know I've made some mistakes, and I think it's really humbling to hear someone, especially like you, who's like putting in all that work and trying to educate others to also just identify I made mistakes. Like, you're making mistakes out in the open and people are giving you that feedback. And instead of just being like, I suck, I screwed up, it's like you're calling that out and you're like, I'm learning from this. And I think that to me is inspiring too, is that we are all learning and it's okay, but it's like you have those learnings and you grow from them. And I think that to me is just super powerful. So I want to stop and say that. So all these things I think are amazing that you're sharing.
Okay, side note on your side note, make it help people see it's okay to make mistakes. We recover from them. That is such an important message in allyship, because this is a huge space. And as I said, like, if I knew what I didn't know at the beginning, I wouldn't have even tried to do this work I'm doing today. It's a huge space. We can't possibly know it all. And that means we are going to make some mistakes as we try to show up as allies and take action as allies. We're going to make mistakes. And the worst thing is if people step back from this conversation because once they made a mistake and they got chastised, or worse, they got canceled or something like that. We need people to actually be doing this work. And when we make a mistake, we apologize, learn from it, move forward. It's fine. You can recover from these things. So I try to normalize making mistakes, even though I wish I made less of them. I will admit. Oh, okay. Here's another one. I once said a good thing for a better ally to do is to give people a platform to speak so that people can get more visible, whether that is opening up your staff meeting for people who, individual contributors to speak at, or maybe giving up your slot on a panel at a conference so someone who doesn't normally get that chance gets to. Give people a platform to speak. That's good. But then I also added, and attend their dry runs to give them feedback. Well, someone pointed out to me, it's like, hey, Karen, maybe that's too big of an assumption that they need to get better, that they need to improve, and that they even want your feedback. Like, isn't that a position of privilege that you think that they can't do a good job without you giving them feedback? And fair, that is good. So I think that many people who are underrepresented and overlooked can do a stellar job at presentations. Just give them the space to speak, and they will do a stellar job. So instead of assuming that they need feedback, offer feedback if they want it. Like, it's just a slight change in how we are thinking about things. Would you like some feedback? I'd be happy to attend your dry run if you're holding one. Small things like that. So again, I got to get out of that savior mentality of I'm going to save someone from giving a bad presentation to how can I best support them? So if they even need the support, it's like checking in to see if they even need it. So that's another kind of thing I always have in the back of my mind. None of us want to be a savior, or maybe some of us do, but we shouldn't, as a better ally, we shouldn't feel that need to save someone from their demise. That's not this thing. They just need often to be given the opportunity to thrive. Yeah.
I love that example too, because it's so nuanced. Like it's so tiny, like that there's little difference of just the way you framed it, and it just invites it a lot. It just comes across completely different. And I think a lot of these things, that's what's happening. It's just like these words are just making people feel a little more comfortable. And I think that piece of inclusion is so important, is like when we all feel comfortable in our roles or our companies, everything, we just thrive. We do our better work. Like if you feel comfortable, you're not worried about like, oh, I just feel like frustrated with how Karen just said that word. It's like, no, you don't even think about that. It's just like, it should be more inviting. I'm curious though, because I have run into this where you had mentioned something too, the handicap one. That's a good example where it's like, yeah, I grew up around golf and that was absolutely a saying. And, you're just like, oh, that's the way I know it. Sometimes when you tell someone those things like, hey, you probably shouldn't use handicap because of the ableness language that's around it, they're like, but that's how I've always known it. That's just that's ludicrous. Why would we keep changing words? And like, this is ridiculous. I'm curious what you would have to say to someone in that scenario. If I was like, that's dumb, Karen, like, I'm going to keep saying handicap. And like, I would just be curious when you have that confrontation around something like that, how do you deal with that?
Yeah. There's a strategy I use all the time to call people in to about a topic. I say call in because I'm not trying to shame or blame someone for something they just did, but so I'm not calling them out, but I'm calling them in because I want to share some insider knowledge about what I've learned. So the strategy is seek common ground and educate. I used to think it was perfectly fine to use the word, here's another one, analysis paralysis. I used to say that all the time. It was a, well-accepted term. Everyone knows what it means. I used to think it was perfectly fine to say that. But I have since learned, okay, seek common ground and educate. I used to say it, but I have since learned. I've since learned it's an ableist term and so on. So we can say that, we can use that. I used to think that too, say that too, but I have since learned in so many situations. That said, I also have to bring a critical eye to, well, that's probably an ableist term, a critical lens to any phrasing that people call me out on. Recently, someone said to me, one of my newsletter subscribers, I think I must have put my newsletter that I had just given a fireside chat on this topic and got this question or something like that. And they said, Karen, I've learned that fireside chat is not inclusive. Why do you use it? And so I wrote back, I'm like, haven't heard about that yet. And I Googled, Google's your friend here. So I Googled it. I couldn't find anything. So I wrote back and I said, I haven't come across that. I tried to search online for why. What have you learned? What, tell me more. And they sent me a long Gemini AI explanation of fireside chat not being inclusive. I mean, pages, Ryan, pages long. And I read through this with a critical eye, because we all have to use that with AI these days.
Yes, especially with AI.
Critical lens. I want to say that again. I don't want to assume that we have to have eyes to do this. And with my critical lens, I started realizing, wait a second, Gemini AI is hallucinating a little bit here. It said something like, fireside chat's not inclusive because it assumes a fireplace, and many homes don't have fireplaces, so people who lack fireplaces lack warmth in their homes and therefore won't feel included in a fireside chat. And I'm like, that doesn't really jive with my understanding of this. You can have warmth in your house without a fireplace. And also, a fireside chat, I think, has roots in like the dawn of humankind, where we gathered around fires to share lore and stories that were important for survival.
Yep.
So I just wrote back, here's my problem with what Gemini AI. I think it's hallucinating a little bit. And this is a little snarky. I try not to be too snarky, but I couldn't resist. I put the Gemini AI response into chatbot or to ChatGPT and said, hey, ChatGPT, this is what Gemini AI said to this prompt. Can you analyze the response and let me know what you think? And ChatGPT poked holes in it too. And this is the snarky side. I sent it to the person respectfully saying, here's my problem with it. I asked ChatGPT to analyze it, and here's what they said. They actually thanked me for having an AI check their AI.
I mean, I like that you did that too, because it is I don't think it's snarky. It's like, it's also just like testing in some ways the biases or, just some messed up things that happen in the AI. And we're seeing that with different models where they're just giving us different answers. And I think that that's just doing your due diligence. But I love that you're like, it's snarky, but it's like, it's kind of cool. It's like back in the day when we had like Google and Alexis talking to each other. I've seen videos on that and like how they would different respond. And it's like, it's interesting to check those. It's like, don't just rely on the one source.
Exactly. So that's getting back to my original point. It's okay to do some research if someone is telling you, hey, I heard this isn't inclusive, or that whatever. Let's use our brains here, bring some thinking to the issue, and make sure that we understand the root cause, if there is one, a root problem, and are showing up the right way as a result. Okay. I also just have to say, one thing I've learned is also, like, if I'm not living with a disability myself right now yet. I probably will in the future.
Let's hope not.
Right now,
keep living strong.
I'm not living with a disability. And I have to make sure that I'm not then dismissing someone, for example, who raises a concern about an ableist term, who is from the disability community. Like, it's not me to say, well, no, you shouldn't feel that way. No, I need to understand that's the way they feel. But it's okay to be a little critical too, and make sure that we understand that this is coming not just from, I don't know, like just a random AI that's telling me this.
Fair enough. Karen, you mentioned mistakes in this. Like I said, I love that you're reflecting on mistakes that you've made and using those as lessons. I'm a huge believer in making mistakes that's how we grow. And like, we just need to almost celebrate those mistakes. I mean, I'm always trying to tell my kids that it's just like, hey, like, it's cool to make mistakes and celebrate those. And like, what did you learn from them? I think it's a great way to continue growing. You mentioned something though, when you were talking about that, is the cancel culture. The cancel culture is something that is just out there. It's big. And I'm curious your thoughts on that. And like, should we be treating people like that when they make a mistake? Is that the right way of just completely writing them off? Like, how do you feel about cancel culture? I think it's such an interesting area, and I'm not quite sure how to dive into that one.
Yeah. I don't know if I don't think I've spoken about this before. So this is fascinating to me. Cancel culture. So as I step back from examples of cancel culture, specific examples, what I think I see is people who are frustrated that they can't make change. They can't get through to someone without canceling them. It's like you need to make a big deal of an incident, a situation, whatever, to draw attention to it, because that's the only way change can happen. So I think that we need to understand that's like the underlying fabric of what's going on here. I wish, though, that there were better ways for making change, for giving people feedback, getting them to listen to feedback and adjust their own behavior. I recently heard from a newsletter subscriber who's pretty frustrated at their company, and especially, I'll just say it's the employee resource group leaders at their company, who, as soon as someone says the wrong thing or does the wrong thing, they make a huge deal out of it, in your face, calling people out, kind of public feedback. And I think, I'm sure you have learned this, if not just done it intuitively over your career in tech, of just like, you criticize in private and praise in public. Like, that's how you give people constructive feedback. Is we don't want to shame and blame anyone in public. Let's do it privately so that they can process it, ask some questions, learn from it, have it be a respectful way of giving someone feedback. But there's a shift that's happened where people, I think, have just had it with, and of course, this is not a manager to an employee kind of relationship. This is a different dynamic in the workplace, where people just want to, criticize in public when people make non-inclusive statements or take non-inclusive actions. And of course, what's the impact of that is people step back. I'm not going to get involved with that group. I'm not going to help support their cause or their group members. I'm going to step back because less exposure means less risk for me. So I haven't addressed this yet, but I really, well, actually I have, but I haven't maybe said it so explicitly, but like this seek common ground and educate strategy that I shared with you just a little while ago, that's a way of getting around the cancel culture. I'm not going to cancel you because you just made a mistake, but I'm going to bring you into this conversation privately and so forth. So I think we need to just provide people with more tools for driving change. Yeah. What are your thoughts, though? Those are some of my thoughts.
No, I like that a lot, where it's like, especially the framing of like, I think cancel culture, if you want to speak to that, it's saying you're calling someone out. That's exactly it. It's like you're really coming at them hard and it's public. And so like the calling out is exactly what's happening. The calling in is something more where I'm like seeing it as like a DM, or, pulling them aside. It's not public shaming. But maybe at some point, if that behavior is not changing, is that when cancel culture is like okay? Like, do you know what I mean? Maybe that's the extreme, is like if you have someone in your company who's just not hearing the feedback, or they're being combative, maybe cancel culture is the right thing. I don't think it is. Like, I think there's other ways, but I think it's a form of escalation. And I think too often right now is people are escalating instead of like starting with that calling in first. And I think that's my thinking around it. It's like, maybe try that first. I don't know if I really like the whole cancel culture aspect of it, because it's then you're just adding more negatives to the world in that sense. But I could see it if you've tried a couple things first and then you want to go to that. All right, let's escalate at that point. Maybe we need some other, layers in there, but I think right now it seems to be like cancel culture first. Like, someone made a mistake, let's throw it at them. So I don't know if that's my thoughts on it. Just like more of what I'm thinking, I'm unpacking on that, is that probably the advice there is start with the call in. Like, let's start there. Let's give
Yeah.
people a little bit of grace that like they may not have even known. Now, if they don't know and they continue this behavior, then what? I'm not sure, because I have run into that, especially a lot of the protests we saw, with George Floyd, everything years ago. I saw some pretty messed up behavior happening, just even from, engineers and in the community, and certain things that I was like, wow, like, that's not good what you're saying. And so you want to try and approach it with education. But then if they're just continually being combative about it, I don't know what you do at that point.
Yeah. Well, one thing I want to comment on is chances are that there are many people who have tried to do the call in and it hasn't worked and they're frustrated. And so it's like, why try it again? I'm just going to do the call out.
Yeah.
I'm sure that many people feel that way. Then there are going to be many people who've never tried it, but it's like, oh, this is very easy to call people out. So, and I see other people around me doing it. So I'm just going to do it too. So anyway, I just wanted to though acknowledge that there are probably a lot of people who are just like, I'm fed up. It never works. So why do I bother spending my time trying to call people in and educate them? So anyway, and that's why I think that better allies should be doing this work as well, as opposed to the person who is on the receiving end of non-inclusive behavior. They shouldn't be having to call people out. And that's what's happening in this example with the ERG leaders, the employee resource group leaders. They are calling people out because they are on the receiving end of some non-inclusive behavior. But imagine a world where there are better allies. Instead, intercepting things, having those conversations, giving feedback afterwards. Hey, are you open to some feedback on last week's meeting? I noticed you did this, and well, those types of actions. So, oh my gosh, I just think allyship is the solution for it.
I mean, as you're saying it, I'm like, I love it. It's a great selling point, but I'm like, yeah, I buy that too, because it's like, if I think about you and I having a bit of like a disagreement or something, we're in a big meeting and I say something just probably wrong, and that happens, and you call me out in front of everyone, I'm going to be a different person, right? Like, it's like, I'm going to feel that shame. I'm going to feel embarrassment, all those things. And so those emotions are going to affect how I take your feedback, versus you saying, hey, Ryan, do you have a minute? I want to talk to you. Like, I used to say handicap too, I'll use that as an example. And I since have learned that that's not the best term. Maybe we could use something better about like, yeah, whatever word that you want to use instead. And just explaining that to me, I'm going to be a lot more open to that then because I'm just not having dealing with those other emotions. And so I think that going straight to the cancel culture, you just like set a fire for all these emotions. It gets heated. And ultimately, what's the goal? I think that's what you also need to roll back on too is like when we cancel someone, why? It's because ultimately you're hoping that people are doing better and like being more inclusive, but that's not going to help that matter. It really isn't. Maybe it shines a light on an example of what not to do, but it's not going to help make that person be any better. It's just going to throw up more walls of emotions that they're dealing with, and maybe they react even more poorly, and then it's just spiraling.
Yeah. And look at our country here in the U.S. Just we're so divided.
Oh yeah.
Our country's not alone. There's a lot of division in other countries too, but just politically, we're so divided, and there are too many role models. I think that we have out there, very visible people who increase the division and divisiveness. And oh my gosh, I don't want that in our workplaces everywhere. I want the role models to be people who are inclusive, who are striving to make a better environment for everyone and bringing people together as opposed to tearing them apart. So let's all do what we can to give that constructive feedback that we see in private. Every now and then there's going to be a situation where it's going to be so much harm is being done in the moment. You need to say something out loud in public, but where we can do it in private, bring people into this conversation, get them invested, get them excited about this, help them learn, and we all can move forward. Life will be good. Kumbaya.
I like that. You mentioned like the companies too, and I think I've definitely seen a shift in tech companies over the past like I don't know, it's been 3 to 5 years even like where I feel like companies are investing more. Like there's actual employees where they have diversity and inclusion groups that they've hired to really think strategically about how a company's showing up like that. I'm curious your thoughts on that. Like since you're so much closer to it, is this like a trend that's continuing, or is it helping companies do better? I'm just curious your thoughts on that one since you're closer to it.
Yeah, it seems like it all happened, and this is not true because there are many companies that had diversity and inclusion officers or groups years and years ago. But soon after George Floyd was murdered by police, it certainly seemed like that was one strategy companies could employ to address the racial divide. And everyone was hiring, chiefs of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, whatever. With the economic recession that we have been going through the last 2 years, roughly, many of those offices or employees were let go. Not completely, not 100%, but there has been a closer scrutiny on budgets, on everything. And so we have seen some of those positions disappear, be restructured out of the organization, whatever the language is, cut. And what businesses need to make business decisions. Some business leaders are better at making long-term investments that are going to pay off. Some are more focused on short-term. It's all over the place in terms of priorities and leadership styles. What is more concerning to me right now is there are a small number of very vocal activist investors who are lobbying different companies to cancel all of their DEI initiatives. And some companies are scared and are following the threats, like, actually paying attention to the threats and making cuts, not necessarily cutting everything, but pruning some activities. Unfortunately, the press takes it out of context and just like dramatizes it all. Like, John Deere eliminates its DEI programs. Well, no, they didn't actually. They just got rid of a few things like sponsoring parades, which I assume is Pride, sponsoring external events like that, a few other small things, but they still have an incredible initiative in place. I've talked to people at John Deere off the record, and they still have an incredible focus on making sure that they increase the number of women and people of color in leadership roles, for example. So there's still a lot of work going on, but these companies are so fearful of being canceled themselves. They're fearful of the press that this activist investor or investors or groups are going to make, that they are basically just rolling over and like, okay, we're going to make a few changes and announce them, and hopefully this person or this group is going to go away. I don't like that at all. I'm really frustrated that that's happening. And I would hope that leaders at these incredible large companies have more of a backbone around doing the right thing. But anyway, that's what I'm concerned about. It's not like the lack of a DEI office. It's more that what are we doing to just just getting scared of the big bad wolf.
That is tough too, because like at the end of the day, like especially if it's investors or things like that that are having this effect, it's like the business at the end of the day, it's a business. It's trying to make money, right? And
Yep.
so that is a bottom line important thing. And so even when they're, running out of money on certain areas or need to cut budgets, like if they're getting threatened on that one, it's like it kind of feels like, all right, well, I guess we cut back here and not invest in it. I also wonder too, is it hard to measure an ROI on it, right? Like to really understand, like having a diversity inclusion group, whatever form it may be. Do you think it's hard for companies to measure like the benefits that it has?
Yeah, I get this question from clients as well as can we measure the investment that we're making in employee resource groups? That's it's a very similar question. Like,
yeah.
And I advise anyone trying to measure the investment, the ROI on these initiatives, is you got to understand what the company's key performance indicators, key metrics are. Top line, like what is the company measuring its success for, and then figure out how you tie into that. So if the company is about growth in AI, for example, that's like a big company, imperative is we have to grow our AI strategy and staff. Well, then figure out how your DEI or employee resource groups can contribute to that. There are ways. I'm not going to go through and list them because I'm not familiar with all of the details of what any company is doing, but figure out how you can show how you are contributing to those larger initiatives, and have that be part of the ROI thing. The ROI equation. The other thing about ROI is, and this one's so simple, I teach it to my clients all the time as I'm trying to pitch work, is if, for example, I do a group coaching program for women, and if my group coaching program is a 6-month program, if it helps retain just one woman in the program, just one, the ROI is there, because on average, it can cost between 50% to 200% of someone's salary to replace them. You do the math. Is the average salary in Silicon Valley these days for an engineer with 5 to 10 years of experience $200,000? That's maybe an easy round number to use. Then it's going to cost 50% of that, $100,000 to $400,000 to replace them. Where's my program fit in? What's the ROI? It's a very simple, kind of math. So I really think about, we can retain employees better. We can contribute to strategic initiatives the company has already valued, and show the value of these things.
Before we end the episode, I want to know, what's 10 years you've been doing this? It's great. What's the future look like for Better Allies and Karen in general?
I don't know. So my husband jokes with me all the time. It's like New Year's resolutions, like a couple of years ago, like my New Year's resolution is not to write another book, because I'd been writing a book almost every year. And I failed. I wrote another book. So anyway, I don't know if I
Good
have
for you. I like
book.
that.
I failed. I really should. I have 4 books now. I really should be spending time promoting them, getting the word out, figuring out the right way to help people leverage what I have been doing. So that's one thing I need to double down on. I'm going to keep doing my newsletter. I can't not do that. So I learned so much. I love sharing and teaching through my writing. I am experimenting with AI, and I am in awe and scared of it at the same time. So I am cautiously looking at it and also trying to understand how can I make sure that I can just provide the right amount and accurate information to people who are looking to be better allies in all the things that are just evolving and moving in that space. I'll just share with you, recently I used Notebook LM from Google to create a faux audio podcast.
Yes, it's
based
so
on my
cool.
newsletter. It
Yeah.
is the coolest thing. These people who, they sound so human. They sound like real podcasters talking about my work.
Yep.
I experimented as a pilot. I got probably 50% positive feedback, 50% negative feedback, but the negative feedback was illuminating to me in terms of it's filled with idiomatic phrases. Is this inclusive to people who aren't native English speakers, Karen? If this is AI, is your whole newsletter AI? Why should I trust you at all? It's like kind of just all sorts of different concerns.
Yeah.
So I'll continue running pilots of different things and trying them out and seeing how the reaction is, as well as do I think it represents accurate information or not. So anyway, those are some ideas of things for the future.
I love that. It sounds like experimenting is a big thing too, right? Like it's just like constantly, keeping up the work that you've done and keeping that consistent, but then also experimenting and trying to understand the new world that we're entering. Like AI is quickly shifting, and how does it affect your work?
Yeah, definitely.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Karen. I'm so happy to have you back on the podcast. Where can people get in touch with you? Obviously, I'll follow the newsletter. That's a good start. But where can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more?
Yeah. So betterallies.com is the website, the social media handle on Instagram, X, Threads, YouTube, Facebook, all the
All the
things.
social media.
Yeah, I don't do TikTok. I'm not on TikTok, but anyway. And then on LinkedIn, which I just feel is becoming more and more relevant for the kind of business communication that I'm doing. On LinkedIn, it's me. It's not Better Allies. It's Karen Catlin. So you can follow me there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.